The Great Council Chamber on Prime was older than most civilizations in the galaxy. Its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for 10,000 years, and its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each one adapted to their particular biological needs. Some breathed methane, others floated in tanks of liquid nitrogen. A few existed as pure energy, contained within magnetic fields. Ambassador of the Dominion walked slowly to the central speaking platform. He was a tall creature with gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His people had been members of the Galactic Council for over 2,000 years. They were respected. They were wise, and right now was terrified. He had spent the last 50 years studying a small species on the far edge of the galaxy. They called themselves humans. They came from a tiny blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. By galactic standards, they were practically newborns. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a century ago. Their technology was primitive. Their fleet was laughably small, and yet had never been more afraid of anything in his entire life. High Counselor, an ancient being made of living crystal, pulsed with impatience, had governed the council for 600 cycles. He had seen species rise and fall. He had witnessed wars that burned across entire star systems. Nothing surprised him anymore. Ambassador said, his voice resonating through the translation systems, "You have requested emergency speaking time. This is highly unusual. What matter is so urgent that it cannot wait for normal proceedings?" Took a deep breath. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he gathered his thoughts. "Honored council members, I come before you today with a warning about the species known as humanity." Laughter rippled through the chamber. The delegate, a massive creature with gleaming black armor, chittered with amusement. "Humanity, those primitive creatures, they have barely mastered basic space travel. What possible threat could they pose?" "That is precisely the question I have spent 50 years trying to answer," replied. "And the answer frightens me more than anything I have ever encountered." He activated the holographic display system, and images began floating above the central platform. They showed a small blue planet covered in oceans and green continents. They showed primitive cities and basic spacecraft. They showed creatures with soft skin and fragile bodies. "Humans are physically weak," continued. "They have no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armor. They cannot survive in vacuum. They cannot breathe underwater. They require a very specific temperature range to function. By any objective measure, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago." "Then why are we discussing them?" demanded the delegate from the collective, a telepathic species known for their peaceful nature. "Because despite all of these weaknesses, humans have not only survived but thrived. They have conquered their planet. They have reached for the stars, and they have done so through a combination of traits that I can only describe as terrifying." Change the display to show a series of historical images from human history. Wars, disasters, plagues, famines, each one should have destroyed them. None of them did. "Humans are impossibly stubborn," he explained. "When faced with extinction, they do not accept it. They fight. They adapt. They refuse to die. Their history is filled with moments where any reasonable species would have surrendered to the inevitable. Humans never do." He showed them images of humans surviving in deserts, in frozen wastelands, on the tops of mountains, in the depths of oceans. He showed them humans who had lost limbs and continued fighting. Humans who had been told they would never walk again, then ran marathons. Humans who faced certain death and laughed. "But that is not what truly concerns me," said, his voice dropping lower. "What concerns me is what happens when humans are united against a common enemy." The display changed again, showing a battle cruiser. It was a massive ship, bristling with weapons, crewed by 4,000 trained warriors. It was one of the most powerful vessels in the fleet. 70 of their years ago, my people made first contact with humanity. We were arrogant. We saw their primitive technology and assumed they would be easy to subjugate. We sent this ship to conquer one of their outer colonies, a mining station with fewer than 800 individuals. Paused. The chamber was completely silent now. The humans destroyed our ship. 800 miners with no military training defeated 4,000 warriors. They turned their mining lasers into weapons. They made explosives from industrial chemicals. They flew cargo shuttles into our hangar bays and detonated them. They fought with a ferocity that my people had never encountered. He deactivated the display and looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. We lost that ship. We lost every soldier aboard. And we learned a lesson that day that I am trying to share with all of you now. Humans do not fight like other species. They do not calculate odds and retreat when victory seems impossible. They do not surrender when facing superior forces. They become more dangerous when cornered, not less. The delegate shifted uncomfortably. You lost one ship to primitives using improvised weapons. This is embarrassing for the, certainly, but it hardly justifies an emergency council session. Turn to face the directly. It was not one ship, delegate. After that first defeat, we sent a fleet of 20 vessels. The humans destroyed them all. We sent 100 ships. They destroyed those too. By the time my people finally agreed to negotiate a peace treaty, we had lost over 300 warships and nearly 1 million soldiers. The chamber erupted in shocked murmuring. They were one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. The idea that they could suffer such losses against a primitive species was almost unbelievable. That is why I am here today, continued, raising his voice above the noise. I am proposing Resolution 7742, a formal prohibition against involving humanity in any interstellar conflict. They must be left alone. They must be allowed to develop in isolation. Because if any species is foolish enough to attack them, if humanity is ever given a reason to turn their full attention toward war, I fear what they might become. High Counselor considered this for a long moment. Your proposal will be debated, Ambassador, but I must say I find your concerns somewhat exaggerated. Humans are a curiosity, nothing more. They pose no real threat to the established powers of this galaxy. Bowed respectfully. I hope you are right, Counselor, I truly do, but I have looked into their eyes, I have seen what burns within them, and I am telling you now as clearly as I can, do not give humanity a reason to fight, because if you do, you will not like the consequences. He returned to his seat. The debate continued for several hours. In the end, Resolution 7742 was tabled for further consideration. Most delegates simply could not believe that such a small, primitive species could pose any real danger. Ambassador watched them dismiss his warnings with growing despair. He had done everything he could. He had shown them the evidence. He had pleaded with them to listen. They had not listened. They would not listen. And somewhere in the back of his mind knew that one day the galaxy would learn the truth about humanity. He only hoped that when that day came, the lesson would not be too costly. But deep down, he already knew that it would be. The swarm had been expanding across the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were a species of creatures with hard black shells and razor-sharp claws. They moved in vast numbers, consuming everything in their path. Entire civilizations had fallen before them. Hundreds of worlds had been stripped bare, their resources devoured, their populations enslaved or destroyed. Fleet Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the tactical display with satisfaction. His compound eyes reflected the glowing images of stars and planets as his officers delivered their reports. The human colony world designated New Horizon lies directly in our expansion path, his tactical officer explained. It contains significant deposits of rare elements that our breeding programs require. The population is approximately 50,000. Their defensive capabilities are minimal. Mandibles clicked together with pleasure. What forces do they have? One orbital defense station, 12 small patrol craft, no significant military presence. Pathetic, said. Deploy the third assault fleet. 40 warships should be more than sufficient. I want this colony secured within one planetary rotation. His officers hurried to obey. None of them questioned the order. Why would they? They had conquered hundreds of worlds. 40 warships against a handful of patrol craft was not a battle. It was a harvest. What did not know, what none of them understood, was that New Horizon was not an ordinary human colony. It had been founded by the descendants of people who had survived terrible persecution on Earth. People who had learned, through generations of suffering, that safety was an illusion. People who had sworn that they would never again be caught unprepared. Governor Martinez stood in the colony's command center, watching the sensor displays with calm eyes. She was a small woman in her 50s, with gray hair and a gentle voice. She looked like someone's grandmother. She had been elected governor because she was kind and fair and always listened to people's concerns. She had also spent 30 years in Earth Special Forces before retiring to this quiet colony world. 40 warships just dropped out of hyperspace, her communications officer reported. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Nodded slowly. Open a channel to the entire colony, emergency frequency. The channel opened with a soft chime. 50,000 people were now listening. This is Governor Martinez, she said, her voice steady and clear. Many of you have seen the censor reports. They are here. They want our homes, our resources, and our lives. They expect us to surrender quietly and accept whatever fate they have planned for us. She paused, looking around the command center at the faces of her staff. Some were afraid. Some were angry. All of them were determined. I am not going to tell you that we can win this fight. The odds are against us. We are outnumbered and, by any reasonable calculation, we should surrender and hope for mercy. Her voice hardened. But we are not reasonable people. We are the children and of survivors. Our ancestors faced extinction and refused to accept it. They fought when fighting seemed hopeless. They survived when survival seemed impossible. And they passed down to us a simple truth. There are some things worse than death. Slavery is one of them. Surrender is one of them. She took a deep breath. Every citizen of New Horizon knows the emergency protocols. You know where to go. You know what to do. For those of you who choose to fight, report to your designated stations. For those of you who cannot fight, protect the children and help with medical support. Whatever happens today, we face it together. We face it as humans. She closed the channel and turned to her tactical officer. Status of planetary defenses. All systems online, Governor. The defense station is fully powered. Ground-based weapons are ready. The surprise packages are armed and waiting. Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. Good, open a channel to the fleet. The main display flickered, and the image of Fleet Commander appeared. His compound eyes seemed to gleam with contempt as he looked at the small human woman. You are the leader of this colony, he asked. I expected someone more impressive. I apologize for disappointing you, replied calmly. I am Governor Martinez. You are in violation of human sovereign space. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. There will not be a second warning. Laughed, a horrible chittering sound that made skin crawl. Foolish creature, your world will feed the swarm. Your people will labor in our breeding pits. Surrender now, and some of you may survive as slaves. Resist, and we will kill every last one of you. Looked at him steadily. Thank you for clarifying your intentions. It makes what comes next much easier. She closed the channel and turned to her tactical officer. Begin defensive operations. The battle for New Horizon began with the activation of the orbital defense station. What they had dismissed as a minor installation was actually a converted asteroid, hollowed out over decades and filled with weapons that had been quietly upgraded and improved for exactly this scenario. Massive opened fire, accelerating metal slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. Energy beams sliced through the void. Missiles streaked toward enemy ships. The first cruiser exploded before its crew even understood what was happening. On the ground, the colonists moved with practiced efficiency. Civilians evacuated to underground bunkers that had been dug deep into the planet's crust. Fighters took up positions in fortified locations that had been disguised as farms and factories. Weapons that had been hidden in plain sight for years were uncovered and brought online. They adapted quickly. They destroyed the defense station within 2 hours, overwhelming it with sheer numbers. They began landing troops, thousands of warriors pouring down from orbit in armored. They expected to find a terrified population ready to submit. Instead, they found hell. Danny Reeves was a shuttle pilot. He had no combat training, no military experience. But when he saw a troop carrier approaching the settlement where his family had taken shelter, he did not hesitate. He flew his unarmed cargo shuttle directly at the enemy ship, ramming it at full speed. The explosion destroyed both vessels and killed 400 soldiers. Maria was 14 years old. She organized a group of children to crawl through maintenance tunnels beneath the city, using their small size to reach places adults could not go. They disabled enemy communication relays with hand tools and homemade explosives. 3 of them died. The rest kept going. Frank was a retired teacher who had never fired a weapon in anger. When troops breached the entrance to a civilian shelter, he stood in the corridor with a hunting rifle and held them off for 6 hours. He killed 37 enemies before he finally fell. The 300 civilians he was protecting escaped through the back entrance. The battle lasted for 2 days. 2 days of constant fighting, of blood and fire and death. They had expected to conquer the colony in hours. Instead, they found themselves locked in brutal combat with an enemy that simply would not stop. When the Earth Defense Force finally arrived, Admiral surveyed the battlefield from orbit and could not believe what he was seeing. Half of the assault fleet was destroyed. The other half was scattered across the planet, fighting desperate battles against civilians armed with improvised weapons. He landed at the colony's main settlement and found Governor Martinez waiting for him. She was covered in dust and blood, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steady. "How many did you lose?" asked. 8,000 dead, 12,000 wounded. "And the 22,000 confirmed kills, 14 ships destroyed, 6 ships captured." Stared at her in disbelief. "You took down half their fleet with miners and farmers." Martinez looked at the admiral with eyes that had seen too much death. "We had motivation," she said simply. "They wanted to take our home. We decided not to let them." News of the Battle of New Horizons spread across the galaxy within days. For the first time, the other species began to understand what Ambassador had tried to tell them. Humans were not like other creatures. They did not surrender when facing impossible odds. They did not break when confronting superior forces. They fought harder. And the galaxy began to realize that this had been just a colony of civilians, just ordinary people with no real military training. If this was what human civilians could do, what would happen if humanity ever truly went to war? The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications. But by then, it was already too late. They were coming for revenge, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. High Queen of the Swarm had ruled her people for 200 cycles. She had overseen the conquest of more than 1,000 worlds. She had crushed rebellions, absorbed rival swarms, and expanded her empire across an entire sector of the galaxy. In all that time, she had never once experienced the feeling of defeat. Until now. She stood in her throne chamber, surrounded by advisors and generals, listening to the reports from New Horizon with growing fury. The crystal walls of her palace reflected her massive form as she paced back and forth, her compound eyes glowing with rage. "Explain to me," she said, her voice like grinding stone, "how 40 of my warships were defeated by creatures who do not even have proper claws." Her generals exchanged nervous glances. None of them wanted to speak. None of them wanted to be the one to deliver bad news to the Queen. Finally, Fleet Marshal stepped forward. He was the oldest of her military commanders, a veteran of hundreds of battles. "My Queen, the humans fought in ways we have never encountered. They did not follow standard combat protocols. They used suicide attacks, improvised weapons, and tactics that prioritized damage to our forces over their own survival." "So they are insane," concluded. "Not insane, my Queen, determined. They refused to surrender even when surrender was the logical choice. They continued fighting even when they were wounded, even when they were clearly going to die. Our warriors were unsettled by this." His mandibles clicked together with contempt. "Unsettled. My warriors, the terror of 1,000 worlds, were unsettled by soft-skinned primitives." She turned to face her assembled commanders. "I want the entire fleet mobilized. Every ship, every warrior. We will go to the human. We will reduce their cities to ash. We will enslave those who survive and breed them in our pits until there is nothing left of their species but genetic material for our experiments." One of her advisors, a cautious creature named, stepped forward hesitantly. "My Queen, such a massive deployment will leave our core worlds vulnerable, and the Galactic Council may intervene. Ambassador has been advocating for human protection." Grabbed by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Let them intervene. Let the whole galaxy try to stop us. The swarm has 10,000 warships. We have hundreds of billions of warriors. No force in existence can stand against us." She threw aside and turned back to her generals. "You have your orders. I want the fleet assembled within 2 cycles. Humanity dies." On Earth, President Brooks sat in the Situation Room of the United Nations Security Council, surrounded by military advisors and representatives from every major nation. The holographic displays showed the latest intelligence reports, and none of them were good. Admiral stood at the front of the room, pointing to a 3-dimensional map of space. "Our deep space sensors have detected massive fleet movements. They are mobilizing everything they have. We estimate 10,000 warships will be heading toward human space within 6 weeks." 10,000, repeated General Hawkins, commander of the Marine Corps. "We have 247 combat-capable vessels. Even with emergency production, we might field 300. "Can we evacuate?" asked one of the civilian advisors. "Scatter our population across the galaxy?" Admiral shook his head. "There's nowhere to go. They will hunt us down, and no other species will shelter us if it means making enemies of the swarm." President Brooks listened to the discussion without speaking. She was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She had been elected on a platform of peace and economic development. She had never expected to lead humanity through an existential war. But here she was. "What are our options, Admiral?" she finally asked. Took a deep breath. "Honestly, Madam President, our options are limited. We can't win a straight fight. We're outnumbered more than 30 to 1. Our ships are smaller, our weapons are less powerful, and we don't have the industrial base to replace losses the way they can. So we lose. If we fight alone, yes, we lose." President Brooks stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Millions of people going about their daily lives, unaware that an army of alien monsters was preparing to destroy everything they knew. "Then we don't fight alone," she said quietly. Ambassador Samuel cleared his throat. He was Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, a career diplomat who had spent 20 years navigating the complex politics of interstellar relations. "The Council has been debating intervention for days. They support us, as do the but the larger powers are afraid. They have never been defeated in a major war. Nobody wants to be the first to challenge them. Then we need to change their calculations, President Brooks replied. We need to show them that standing against thee is less dangerous than letting us fight alone. She turned to face the room. Admiral, I'm authorizing full military mobilization. Every factory on Earth is to convert to war production. Every shipyard works around the clock. We're not going to win this war with numbers. We're going to win it with determination, innovation, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. She looked at Ambassador. Samuel, I want you back at the Galactic Council. Tell them what's coming. Tell them that if they destroy humanity, they'll be next. The swarm doesn't stop expanding. They don't make peace. They consume everything in their path. We're just first in line. Nodded slowly. I'll do my best, Madam President, but I can't promise anything. I know, but we have to try. The next 6 weeks were unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. The old national divisions that had plagued Earth for centuries simply melted away in the face of extinction. American factories worked alongside Chinese engineers. Russian scientists collaborated with European researchers. Countries that had been rivals for generations put aside their differences and focused on one simple goal: survival. They called it Project Prometheus. In 6 weeks, humanity achieved what should have taken decades. New weapons systems were developed and deployed. Ships that had been scheduled for construction over the next 5 years were built in 5 weeks. Every resource, every person, every ounce of creativity and determination was directed toward the coming battle. But more importantly, humanity reached out to the rest of the galaxy, not as beggars asking for help, but as equals offering partnership. Ambassador stood before the Galactic Council and spoke with a clarity that surprised even himself. We are not asking you to save us. We are asking you to join us. They are coming to destroy humanity, but they will not stop there. They never stop. Today it is us. Tomorrow it will be you. He looked around at the assembled delegates, seeing fear in many faces. You can hide from this truth, or you can face it. You can hope that the swarm will be satisfied with human blood, or you can stand with us and show them that some things are worth fighting for. Slowly, reluctantly, other species began to respond. The collective, a peaceful race of telepaths who had never fought a war in their history, voted to provide medical support and intelligence sharing. The Dominion, despite their painful history with humans, pledged 40 warships to the defense fleet. The Merchants Guild began quietly shipping weapons and supplies to human colonies. It was not an army. It was not enough to guarantee victory, but it was something. Ambassador watched these developments from his seat in the council chamber, his 4 eyes blinking with complex emotions. He had warned them about humanity. He had told them to leave these dangerous creatures alone. They had not listened, and now humanity was fighting for its life, rallying the galaxy with nothing but words and courage, and the terrifying example of what they had done at New Horizon. Perhaps, thought, he had been right to fear them, but perhaps he had been wrong about what that fear should mean. By the time the fleet reached human space, they were not facing 200 ships. They were facing 600 humans and volunteers from a dozen other species who had decided that some things were worth risking everything for. It still was not enough. The still had overwhelming numbers. But it was a start, and humanity had learned a long time ago that all they needed was a chance. The Battle of Saul was about to begin. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of locusts descending on a wheat field. 10,000 warships arranged in perfect formation, their black hulls blocking out the light of distant stars. They filled the sensor displays of every defense station in human space, a wall of death stretching across the darkness. Admiral stood on the bridge of the EDS Resilience, humanity's largest warship, and forced himself to breathe slowly. He had known this moment was coming. He had prepared for it as best he could. But nothing could truly prepare a person for the sight of 10,000 enemy vessels coming to destroy everything they loved. "All ships report status," he ordered, his voice calm despite the fear churning in his stomach. The reports came in from across the fleet. 612 ships from a dozen different species, humans and volunteers from worlds that had never seen war. They were outnumbered almost 17 to 1. By any reasonable calculation, they were already dead. But they were still here, they were still fighting. "Formation Delta," commanded. "We hold the outer defense perimeter as long as possible. Make them pay for every kilometer they advance." The battle began with a storm of light and fire. Energy beams crossed the void. Missiles streaked toward their targets. Slugs accelerated to deadly speeds. Ships on both sides exploded, their crews dying in the cold darkness of space. The humans fought with everything they had. Their ships were smaller and less powerful than cruisers, but they were faster and more maneuverable. They darted through enemy formations like wolves among cattle, striking at weak points, exploiting gaps in the lines. Captain Bate Warren of the destroyer EDS Defiant led her small squadron directly into the heart of a battle group. Her ship was hit within the first minutes of the engagement, losing propulsion and weapons control. Instead of retreating, she ordered her crew to the escape pods and programmed her crippled vessel to ram the nearest enemy dreadnought. "It's been an honor serving with you all," she said over the ship's intercom. "Now get off my ship and let me finish this." The Defiant struck the dreadnought at full speed. The explosion triggered a chain reaction that destroyed 3 more enemy ships. Bate Warren's last act of defiance cost the 4 vessels and 2,000 soldiers. On the Mars orbital station, Lieutenant Commander Carlos found himself cut off from the main fleet. His relief force had been destroyed hours ago. Enemy troops were burning through the station's outer defenses, and the civilian evacuation was not yet complete. He gathered the remaining defenders, a handful of Marines and civilian volunteers, and made a decision. "We hold them here. We buy time for the transports to escape. Nobody gets past us." They fought for 6 hours. 6 hours of constant combat in the cramped corridors of the station. Carlos watched his people fall one by one, their bodies crumpling under enemy fire. He kept fighting. He kept rallying the survivors. He kept holding the line. When they finally breached the command center, they found Carlos waiting for them with a deadman switch connected to the station's reactor. He smiled at them, blood running down his face from a dozen wounds. "You want this station?" he asked. "You can have it." The explosion was visible from Earth orbit. Private Amy was 19 years old. She had joined the military 6 months ago, straight out of basic training. She had never seen combat before this battle. She had never killed anyone before this day. Now she was crawling through a burning corridor on the defense platform Delta 7, enemy fire screaming overhead, trying to reach a damaged weapons console that was their only hope of stopping an assault carrier from reaching Earth. Half her squad was dead. The other half was scattered, fighting their own desperate battles. She was alone, terrified, and probably going to die in the next few minutes. She kept crawling. The weapons console was damaged but functional. Amy's hands shook as she activated the targeting systems, locking onto the approaching carrier. They saw what she was doing. They turned their weapons toward her position. She could hear them coming, could feel the deck shaking under their clawed feet. She pulled the trigger. The carrier exploded. 4 enemy boarding craft died with it. Amy smiled as enemy fire tore through her position. She died with her finger still on the trigger, still fighting, still refusing to give up. The battle raged for 17 days. 17 days of continuous combat. 17 days of death and sacrifice and desperate courage. The defense fleet was pushed back from the outer perimeter, then from the asteroid belt, then from Mars. On the 12th day, Admiral looked at the tactical display and saw the end approaching. His fleet was reduced to half its original strength. The Still had over 4,000 ships. They were pushing toward Earth, and there was nothing left to stop them. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission on an encrypted Galactic Council frequency." Frowned, "Put it through." The holographic display flickered, and the crystalline form of High Counselor appeared. The ancient being seemed different somehow, more solid, more present. "Admiral said, I have watched your people fight. I have watched them die. I have seen things I did not believe possible. Was too tired for diplomacy. If you've called to offer sympathy, save it. We're busy dying here." "I have not called to offer sympathy. I have called to inform you that the Galactic Council has voted. Resolution 8891 has passed." Something stirred in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "What does that mean?" "It means that the swarm has been declared a threat to galactic peace. All member species are authorized to use whatever force necessary to neutralize this threat." Paused. "Admiral, the combined fleet of the Galactic Council is jumping to your coordinates now. 7,000 vessels from 42 species." Felt his knees go weak. He grabbed the edge of the tactical display to steady himself. "Why? Why now?" His crystalline form pulsed with something that might have been shame. "Because you showed us what we had forgotten. You showed us that courage is not measured in numbers. You showed us that some things are worth dying for." The ancient being paused again. "And because Ambassador finally convinced us that if humanity could do this alone, if you could bleed the swarm like this without help, then perhaps it was better to have you as friends than to risk what you might become as enemies." Wanted to laugh. He wanted to cry. He wanted to collapse on the deck and sleep for 1,000 years. Instead, he straightened his uniform and turned to his bridge crew. "You heard the counselor. Reinforcements are coming. Let's show them what humanity can do." The arrival of the Council fleet changed everything. 7,000 fresh warships dropped out of hyperspace behind the lines. 42 species who had finally decided that standing together was better than falling separately. The suddenly facing overwhelming numbers attempted to retreat. They were not permitted to. High Queen watched from her flagship as her fleet was systematically destroyed. She had been so certain of victory. She had been so confident in the superiority of the swarm. Now her ships were burning around her, and the creatures she had dismissed as primitives were tearing her empire apart. "Surrender," Admiral transmitted across all frequencies. "Recall your troops, end this war, or we will destroy every ship you have." Considered her options. She could fight to the death. She could take as many enemies with her as possible. It would be the proper response to defeat. But she was not ready to die, not yet. "We surrender," she said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "The swarm stands down." The Battle of Saul ended on the 17th day with the complete destruction of the assault force. High Queen was taken prisoner. Her flagship was captured intact. The swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years was finally broken. Humanity had survived, but more than that, humanity had changed, and so had the galaxy's perception of them. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Resilience and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were celebrating their survival. Billions more beings from dozens of species were wondering what this moment meant for the future. He thought about all the people who had died to make this moment possible. Bate Warren, Carlos, Amy, thousands of others whose names he would never know. They had not died in vain. They had died so that humanity could live, so that the galaxy could learn that some things were worth fighting for. Hoped they were watching. He hoped they knew that their sacrifice meant something. And he hoped that the galaxy was ready for what came next, because humanity was no longer a small, isolated species on the edge of known space. They were players now, and they intended to stay that way. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Saul. 1 year since humanity had faced extinction and emerged victorious. 1 year since the galaxy had learned that the small, primitive species from the edge of known space was something much more than they had expected. The Galactic Council chamber on Prime was filled to capacity. Representatives from nearly 50 civilizations had gathered for what promised to be a historic occasion. For the first time in 10,000 years, a new species was being inducted as a full member with permanent council representation. Ambassador Samuel walked toward the central speaking platform, surrounded by a small delegation of humans who had distinguished themselves during the war. Admiral walked beside him, his uniform decorated with medals from a dozen different species. Governor Martinez was there too, along with others who had become symbols of human determination and courage. The chamber fell silent as took his place at the podium. He looked out at the assembled aliens, creatures of every imaginable shape and form, and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Billions of humans were watching this broadcast. The words he spoke today would shape his species' relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. He took a deep breath and began. 1 year ago, we faced extinction. We were outnumbered and alone. Many of you expected us to surrender. Some of you hoped we would. You were afraid of what we might become if we survived. He paused, letting the words sink in. Ambassador warned you about us. He told you we were dangerous. He was right, smiled slightly. But he was also wrong. Yes, we are dangerous. Yes, we fight with a determination that other species find disturbing. But we do not fight because we enjoy violence. We fight because we love life. We fight because we refuse to accept that the universe is a cold, uncaring place where the strong simply consume the weak. He gestured to the humans beside him. Every person standing here today lost someone in the war. Admiral lost his son. Governor Martinez lost her husband and 2 daughters. I lost my brother. We carry that grief with us every day. But we do not let it turn us into monsters. We let it remind us what we were fighting for. High Counselor rose from his seat, his crystalline form pulsing with formal authority. Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I am prepared to offer humanity full membership. But I must ask a question first. What do you intend to do with this seat at our table? What role does humanity see for itself in galactic affairs? Had expected this question. He had prepared for it. But now, standing in this ancient chamber with the eyes of the galaxy upon him, the prepared speech felt inadequate. He decided to speak from his heart instead. We intend to keep you honest, he said. We intend to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. We intend to remind this council that power does not equal righteousness, that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak, and that there are principles worth defending even when defending them is difficult. He turned to address the full chamber. Ambassador was right to warn you about us. We are dangerous. We are stubborn. We are impossibly determined. When we believe in something, we will fight for it with everything we have, regardless of the odds against us. His voice grew stronger. But we are also compassionate. We are creative. We build as well as destroy. We dream of a future where every species can live in peace, where diversity is celebrated rather than feared, where the galaxy is governed by cooperation rather than conquest. He looked around at the assembled delegates. We will argue with you. We will challenge your assumptions. We will ask uncomfortable questions and refuse to accept comfortable lies. We will probably drive you absolutely crazy at times. Paused and smiled. But we will also stand beside you when darkness comes. We will fight your battles as if they were our own. We will never abandon an ally, never betray a trust, never back down from a just cause. That is who we are. That is what we offer. He stepped back from the podium. Take it or leave it. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then slowly the delegation began to applaud. Their four-eyed faces showed something that looked like respect, perhaps even admiration. The joined them, their telepathic emissions broadcasting approval throughout the chamber. Then the Merchants Guild. Then species after species, until the entire hall rang with the sound of acceptance. Ambassador watched from his seat, his thoughts impossible to read. He had warned them about humanity. He had been right about their dangerous nature, their terrifying determination, their refusal to accept defeat. But perhaps he had been wrong about what those traits meant for the galaxy. Perhaps the galaxy needed dangerous creatures who refused to accept injustice. Perhaps it needed stubborn, impossible, infuriating humans to remind everyone else what they had forgotten. Perhaps strength and compassion were not opposites but partners. High Counselor formally inducted humanity into the Galactic Council. The ceremony was ancient, involving rituals that had been performed for 10,000 years. When it was complete, Ambassador was officially recognized as humanity's permanent representative, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. As the formal proceedings concluded, approached privately, the ancient being's crystalline form flickered with curiosity. One question, Ambassador. Your people fought with such ferocity, such complete disregard for your own lives. I have seen many species at war. None of them fight like humans. Where does that come from? Considered the question carefully. We are afraid, Counselor. We are always afraid. We know how fragile life is, how easily it can be taken away. Our history is filled with extinction events, disasters, wars that nearly destroyed us. We have looked into the void and seen how close we came to oblivion so many times. A species defined by fear seemed puzzled. A species that turns fear into fuel, corrected. A species that refuses to let fear paralyze us. We look at the darkness and we light a fire. We face impossible odds and we fight anyway. Not because we do not fear, but because we fear losing what we love more than we fear death. Considered this for a long moment. I believe I am beginning to understand. You are not fearless. You are simply more afraid of giving up than you are of dying. Something like that, smiled. We are not the strongest species. We are not the most technologically advanced, but we are possibly the most stubborn creatures the universe has ever produced. We simply refuse to accept that anything is impossible. As he walked out of the council chamber, past Ambassador, the two of them paused, looking at each other with mutual respect. You were right to warn them, said. And you were right to prove me wrong, replied. The galaxy is safer with humanity in it. Stranger, perhaps, more unpredictable, but safer. Laughed softly. I'm not sure everyone would agree with you. No, admitted. But they will learn, as we all learned. Humanity is a force that cannot be controlled or contained. The only question now is whether that force will benefit the galaxy or consume it. Looked back at the council chamber, at the dozens of alien species who had just voted to accept humanity as equals. Why not both? We tend to be complicated that way. Four eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. Indeed, I suspect the next 1,000 years will be very interesting. Walked out into the light of the alien sun, feeling the warmth on his face. Behind him, the council chamber buzzed with activity as delegates discussed what humanity's admission would mean for the future. Ahead of him, a new era was beginning. Humanity was no longer alone. They were no longer outsiders looking in at a galaxy that did not understand them. They were part of something larger now, with all the responsibilities and opportunities that entailed. The warning had been given, the warning had been ignored, and in the end the warning had been proven both right and wrong. Humanity was dangerous, but they were also exactly what the galaxy needed. Ambassador thought about all the humans who had died to make this moment possible. The soldiers, the civilians, the ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. They had given everything so that their species could survive and thrive. He would not let their sacrifice be forgotten. He would make sure that humanity lived up to the promise of this day. He would build a future worthy of the people who had died to protect it. The galaxy would never be the same again, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what it needed. A new dawn was rising across the stars. Humanity was ready to meet it.